Today we are here for a panel discussion to talk about the cloud and digital transformation. And the topic of today's discussion is cloud crisis and citizens in need. So before we get to the panel and the panelists themselves, I'm Arka Ray. I'll be the moderator for today. Let's first give a warm welcome to our panelists over here today. First, we have Mr. Kirk Arthur. He leads worldwide public safety and justice at Microsoft. Following that, we have our very own Mr. Ang Panyong. Panyong here leads the cloud transformation team here at HTX, and you will have seen him throughout this event. And next to him, we have Mr. Vishal Parpia. He is co-founded his own startup, CloudCover. And finally, joining us virtually from the United States is Mr. Sunil Madhugiri. He is the CTO of the US Customs and Border Patrol. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. And given the answers that I see, and knowing what I know about you guys, I think we'll have quite a great conversation coming up ahead. So let's first start with some just key insights and highlights that all your panelists have to share. And we'll start with Mr. Sunil Madhugiri. So Sunil, you have played an important role in helping your agency, the USCBP, digitally transform and stay current in the face of emerging challenges. What are some of the learning points that you had? And how different is transformation in the public sector versus the private sector, both of which you have experience? And what's next in your journey?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody from the United States. Basically, I'll break up this question into a few parts and I'll probably answer it that way. As you heard, currently I'm the Chief Technology Officer for CBP. So CBP is the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. There's 65,000 strong men and women who are protecting the United States borders. We are with allowing legal travel and legal trade in the United States. We are a massive, almost a lot of GDP components within the United States depends on the trade. So we play a very major role. So you can imagine the challenges we have had or we had before the systems, older system, newer system, where we're going towards that, right? From our perspective, from the cloud perspective, I would say the digital transformation journey we started about 5 to 6 years back. And now I would say I've coined a new term now, call it the level of digital excellence now. It's no longer digital transformation, it's digital excellence. That's where we are moving towards that. So our management, we call it the speed of mission. That's what we move towards. I'm actually in southern part of the United States, near Arizona, and this morning actually I visited the border to see exactly what we are doing. So from that perspective, we are playing a major role to make sure that the public component of this, from the cloud component of this, is that we providing good tools to our men and women in the front lines. That's the bottom line for us. How did we start doing this? Let me just quickly give you a brief synopsis as to how CBP went about moving to the clouds. First thing what we did was we had actually a mandate to move away from data centers. We do not want to be in the area of data centers. Our job is to protect the United States. So based on that, so we said we're going to start moving applications to the cloud. And lift and shifting was not an option to the cloud. That means taking an application which is running on-prem, taking exactly the way it is and putting on cloud. That did not make sense because the costing model did not make sense for that. So what we did, we start classifying the application into three areas. Certain areas, we call it the software as a service area, where some application can fit in that area. A lot of applications will also fit in the what is called the platform as a service area. And we also had a lot of custom built applications, which we have to actually transform again and refactor some of those applications and move it to the cloud. So what we decided initially was what we will do is we'll take the low-hanging fruits, which is easier data model, and start moving those. So if you are coming to the United States and if you're a global entry customer, you are running your applications running on the cloud here in the United States. So that's one good example. But we also have some very large databases, as you can imagine, petabytes of databases that, from size perspective, those are still running on-prem, and we're trying to figure out how to exactly we take that journey to the cloud. So we have some ideas. So we have what is called we have created what is called a TRA, but it stands for it's a technical reference architecture, and that our TRA includes the path to move some of these large legacy applications into the cloud. So our plan is by 2025, or that's our plan initially as of right now. That may move, but as of right now, 2025, we plan to get out of the data center. That's a very challenging goal, and we'll see how that goes. But that definitely is what we are trying to do. So with respect to public and private enterprise, I came from the private sector myself. I joined the agency 3 years back, so I have a very interesting perspective of what exactly is happening in the private sector too. So I was one of the chief architects of various companies on the tech side, and what I'm finding now is, so because the public-private partnership is critical to keeping our country safe from that perspective. What we are doing is we build custom products, as you can imagine, our own custom products, but we also buy CARS product from the industry. So we're depending on the private side of things too. So this joint, I would say, the partnership is very, very critical for where we bring digital transformation, and in my case, as I said, digital excellence to the next level. What we have done is we have also partnered with very, very large cloud providers and other companies to figure out, as I mentioned, about data component of things, right? As to how we move that large components into the cloud. So this partnership had worked out very well. Because of my experience in the private sector, I was able to bring some of the expertise and also some of the connections and how do we do things in the private sector. I brought those excellence within CBP. So I'm very excited about the panel. I would like to, any questions you have, I'd like to answer that, and looking forward to the discussion here.
Thank you, Sunil. I think you raised some quite a few interesting points, especially I think public-private partnership, because here at HTX, that's a big element of what we do. Why we often think, why rebuild the wheel, right? If it's someone's made it, if they do it well, let's work together, let's maximize the efficiency. And that's what cloud is about. Fun fact, one of the words that appeared in the word cloud towards the end was efficiency. And so, it's I think that's a big element of what cloud and digital transformation enables. So thanks, Sunil, for your views. Moving on from Sunil, I think, Kirk, I'd like to ask you, because Sunil has been, as he said, he's works on securing the border. But I know that you have a history with the Secret Service and law enforcement, right? And many of our colleagues here in the home team are similar. They're in law enforcement. They actively support them as well. And so, given that background, I think we'd like to know, how do you tie your diverse experiences together to enable things like digital transformation with your role at Microsoft to actually help and be more effective within an organization? And after that, how do you see public trust and safety changing in the future due to periods of unrest or instability, such as, for example, COVID-19? What are your views on that?
Fantastic, and thanks for the opportunity here. It's an exciting panel and really exciting times, as you alluded to. I spent 19 years in U.S. law enforcement. And for me, it was fascinating in the 90s watching technology evolve, and criminals by default, they transform a lot faster than law enforcement. They're not bound by restrictions, right? And as digital technology evolved, the internet, suddenly your criminals weren't local, they were national, international, and how do you work with other countries to go, obtain your digital artifacts, your digital evidence, how you secure that. This would take months, right? Financial-based crime. So you mentioned Secret Service. I was a special agent with them, and that agency, we're known for the protection time, but there's also the financial fraud and financial crimes piece of that was the agency was founded on. So when I was assigned to the Secret Service at headquarters, look at cybersecurity, making sure our staff, our agents were trained to do digital forensics, network intrusion investigations, making sure they had the tools. And so, Neil, I'm glad you mentioned the public-private partnership, because the agency at the time established what was called the Electronic Crimes Task Forces. And that was a blend of federal and state and local investigators, forensically trained. You worked with the academic community and given jurisdictions and geographies to learn from them. You have to work with the court system and optimize there. Even when you're prosecuting cases, a jury has to understand how the crime occurred. And this gets very complex, and it's almost like trying to translate, a foreign language to a jury to understand. So the challenge was, though, law enforcement, even to this day, we still don't have the right tools necessarily to go after this. Criminals have been using cloud for years, well over a decade. And again, law enforcement and governments around the world are still bound by rules and regulations that are prohibitive. On that word cloud, I saw change management, innovation. Those are huge, right? Because this is disruptive, but it's also optimization to me. You have an existing infrastructure, bringing in some modern cloud technology capabilities to optimize what you've already invested in, your on-premise environment. Start maybe stitching information together just as an individual agency, but then start viewing who are my other stakeholders in that environment. How can I share information in a trusted environment? Maybe it's a data enclave that you have limited access, zero trust models. Start having that flow of information, work through the compliance and the regulatory limitations. Maybe some countries need to change laws and statutes, but let's do that so we can change the dynamics of crime. I just read this morning the FBI came out with their IC3, the latest fraud, online fraud impacted the U.S. for 2021. It was about $6.9 billion lost to citizens of the United States. That's one country. We know it's much broader. You mentioned the pandemic. That remote work, that threat plane for governments, for private sector entities, having your staff work from home, their home networks. How do you manage that? And it has to be that joint public-private partnership, having the right tools in place for that. And then even for me, the operations side, the programmatic fraud, when the dust settles from the pandemic, is going to be massive. It's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars that all good intentions by all these governments for stimulating economies, but that money simply isn't going everywhere it needs to go. So how do you prevent that going forward from program fraud? Using technology like digital identity and other aspects there. But then how do you investigate this and hold those responsible and really finding your high value targets and the organized crime groups online and pursuing them jointly? And I think that aperture, what technology means, especially cloud, gives you the tools and capabilities to be able to do that. And that's why I'm excited with MHA and HTX here in Singapore, that vision. You guys are living that, right? You're driving towards that. And it becomes a model for other parts of the world where we can all collaborate and work together. So it's exciting. These are really impactful times.
I think that's really a great point that you raised about the fact that we are driving towards that. That is the end goal, right? But as we drive towards that, we have to see what the criminal organizations are also doing so that we don't stay stuck on some dogmatic view that this is the right answer, that one answer is the only way. And I think it's very apt that you raised that, your criminal organizations, they use cloud. They've been using cloud for a while. And not just cloud, I think other technologies like cryptocurrencies, for example, were often used for criminal activities before they're used for more consumer-based purposes. And in a way, almost, it's like they're like startups. They move fast. They're not worried about all the big things that the governments and large companies are bound by, as you said, the regulatory sort of potentially hurdles, but also safeguards, right? And I think that's always a challenge between law enforcement and anyone that law enforcement is trying to catch. And speaking of startups, obviously not to link it to criminal organizations. I think
that is a compliment.
Let's move on to Mr. Vishal Parpia. Vishal, with your company, you represent on this panel quite a unique viewpoint as an entrepreneur in this cloud space. In contrast to governments or large multinational corporations, smaller businesses often have to be more agile and flexible, or as some put it, you have to be willing to move fast and break things. And what, in your opinion, how has cloud technologies enabled smaller organizations and teams to carry out their projects better? And how do you see it changing how teams collaborate and create further? In addition to that, you yourself have worked with governments as well. And how do you see those elements supporting the government landscape in terms of their digital transformation?
Right. Well, thank you, Arka. Thank you, Panyong, for having us here. You're absolutely right. The the cloud has allowed smaller businesses, organizations that are subscale to be able to really put together their projects and deliver applications much, much faster in a way that allows them to really compete with much larger businesses. And what we've seen happen with cloud technology, and so just brief foray into cloud technology itself, it's such a nebulous term. It encompasses so much stuff. The way I see it is it's somebody else's computer, it's somebody else's software, it's somebody else's technology that you're using, so that you don't have to build those building blocks yourself. And that is kind of common thread, I think, between what everyone's been talking about today, which is how much can you accelerate by leveraging technology that already exists in the market, in these these big cloud players that are providing this to everybody. Small business is no different from that. Small teams are no different from that. And what we found is that a high-performing small team, especially in the digital space, can easily reach millions of customers in a remarkably short span of time by using these building blocks, these foundational elements, and assembling them in intelligent and clever ways. You don't need to be a massive enterprise these days to compete. And I believe that a large portion of the disruption that was being mentioned earlier has come from that fact that you don't need that level of scale to be able to now participate in the new ecosystem. Mentioned the pandemic. One of the key things that we've seen with small business, especially in Singapore, is just how rapidly they had to innovate. It was innovate or die. Because the traditional, for instance, food and beverage locations had such a massive impact. The second that we went into the pandemic, everything got shut down. It was impossible to have them actually get their patrons. You saw people set up online stores using stores as a service, e-commerce as a service. You saw online payments take off, right? So, all of the payment gateways and all of those services being offered. You saw folks using delivery as a service. There's all of these pieces that kind of came together to enable folks to be able to innovate, change their business. And we're kind of getting to the point where hopefully the pandemic is, a little bit less we have less stringent requirements, certainly, in terms of complying. But we found that those innovations have remained. Those are long-lasting changes to these businesses that have happened over the course of this period. So it's been fascinating to watch how these folks have been able to dramatically change their business, continue to improve the services that they provide their customers, build applications on top of these platforms, and really deliver value. I would say that the same sort of plus points apply to anything that happens at the government level. And as the co-founder of CloudCover, we have worked closely with a lot of the startups that have been using cloud and really pushing the limits of what you can do on the platform. To see that applied now to larger businesses and governments is really fascinating. What's interesting is we've got a service that we call co-innovation, where we'll partner up with enterprises and in some cases governments. In that situation, you've actually got these governments, these enterprises trying to capture some of that magic that exists at the startup level and implement those things for themselves. And that's fascinating to me because that's a nod towards agility, nimbleness. And I think that a large number of the enterprises actually suffer from the fact that they're very rigid. They've got departments, they're structured, they're organized, they're at scale. Collaboration is difficult. You've got regulation, you've got governance requirements, and some of that stuff slows you down. So when you say break things, that's kind of one of the things that you have to be worried about. For governments, especially in Singapore, we've seen an amazing application of technology just across the board. Coming from India, for me, it's been a breath of fresh air. I mean, there's so much out here that's already been done. I'll give you an example. So, for instance, with SingPass, right, the authentication layer that's required for all of your citizen services to be delivered, the trust factor that comes in when you have a platform of that sort that's interwoven with all of the services that are being delivered cannot be overstated. There's a certain degree of of trust and capability that's kind of built into a platform now. And that's sort of a building block. So for Singapore to continue to build applications at rapid pace to serve the needs of citizens, I think it's absolutely crucial for more of those sort of platforms to be created and then shared inter-agency.
All right. Thanks for that, Vishal. I think you raised quite a few really amazing points. A funny survey that I'd seen, I think late last year, was a lot of employees were asked what drove digital transformation in your company, and one of the options was my company's CIO or digital transformation lead did it, but the biggest option was COVID-19. That's what really it was. It made it necessary, and people realized how important it was, and cloud technologies were right place, right time. Also, an interesting point you raised on how it helps governments help their own people, right? You mentioned SingPass. A lot of people might be familiar with the Americans who have the social security numbers, and India is implementing an Aadhaar system. It's very difficult for much larger populations, right? And I think being able to do it at smaller scales and roll out is quite a big achievement that every country is aiming for. And cloud definitely helps with that because of how much easier it is to disseminate the information. Yeah, so I think great points there. Yeah. Finally, Pan Yong.
Yes.
There's been a lot of talk in this summit about our own sovereign cloud. It sounds really cool. It sounds exciting. It sounds, sovereign cloud. So fancy. But while it sounds powerful and secure, there are some questions that people might have about it, including what that term even actually entails. We just discussed that, cloud, artificial intelligence, these are quite ambiguous terms, right? Similarly, sovereign cloud. So maybe you can start by telling us how HTX decided that a sovereign cloud was the right approach for us, where we intend to go with it, and finally, how can we maximize the positive impact of it?
Yeah, thanks, Aka. I think first I want to thank my fellow panelists for coming online, for Sunil, Kurt, of course, Vishal. I think it's quite an interesting mix of panel. I really appreciate the insights that everyone gave just now. In fact, I was going through that and then put on many points. I want to ask questions myself a bit later. Maybe I'll just gate crash the Q&A. But I think the cloud journey for the government started quite a while back with GCC. We always have a multi-cloud strategy in whatever we do. We want to make sure that, and the reason to some extent, we mentioned a bit earlier about external factors driving us to innovate. Now, some of those factors around citizens are going online, right? We cannot say, look, we're going to stay in the closed door environment because citizens are going out online. We talk about criminal going online. We have to be ahead of the curve. We talk about COVID driving us. We have to go digital. We have to think about the things like virtual, physical, metaverse, a whole bunch of other stuff. I think to some extent, we have a technology roadmap as whole of government. There are really factors that sort of push us to sort of accelerate and move ahead of the curve. I think our investment at the journey with GCC have reaped its benefit. We've seen that happening with COVID. We've seen that happening with SingPass. We've seen that happening with Trace Together. And we actually learned a lot of lessons from that. Now, while we do that, there's always an issue about risk appetite, right? How much do we trust the cloud for all data, right? For operation in the home team, there's always a concern, right? We are custodians of our citizens' data, right? Be it criminal records, be it citizens' personal data, be it histories of investigation. There's a really sensitive data, and as part of MHA, we tend to be more calibrated in our approach to go cloud. I think in areas that we think is citizen-facing, we have gone ahead and said, let's do that. But yet, there's a big, many systems that are not getting the benefit of the cloud, and recognize there's benefits, and therefore the sovereign cloud. Now, the definition of sovereign is a good question, right? I think there is a marketing aspect to it, and say, well, it sounds better than saying private, secure, a whole bunch of words to describe it. But I think if I use it, it's really about data. I think Sunil mentioned a bit earlier about dealing with massive, large database migration. Now, if I use the word data has velocity, right? Data sort of holds you back. Where we're always concerned is not, I don't think with technology like encryption and a whole bunch of other stuff, we are not as concerned about people stealing our data, but as much as saying, look, we want to make sure that we always have access to our data. We will not be held ransom that someone can take away the key, take away access from us, and we're going to have that problem, right? So therefore, the sovereign cloud forces us to say, look, number one, data must be located in Singapore. Number two, we should have full control of those data, both in terms of processes and technology, as well as security controls. So these are the fundamental principles around data security. So that's one aspect. The other aspect we are concerned with for sovereign cloud is cyber attack. It's real. It turned up in the World Cloud Summit and was real issues today we are facing. Right, the digital crime has will surpass the physical crime we are facing today. And the big challenge for us is things like supply chain attack, right? And that's I read to you some statistics, right? 66% of attack today focus on the code from supplier, and we use a lot of open source software. Even Microsoft have put a lot of stuff on open source because that's the best way to build really, really good software, right? That's the reality, but attackers are also focusing on those areas. 58% of attacks focus around accessing those data. So they know what's the crown jewel. They are focusing on attacking the crown jewels. So that's important for us. And 62% focus around trust that's been developed, right? Because we trust our suppliers and people recognize that's a trust, that's the best form of entry, right? Of course, 62% uses malware. So these are concerns, right? How do we ensure that we sort of narrow the pipe of things coming in and limit the so-called the attack vector for supply chain attack? So that's the other consideration of going sovereign. Of course, having those so-called lower layer controls probably is not sufficient. We still need to put the layer on top. And we talk about the layer on top in HTX, we call it a Cloud Platform Plus. But honestly, that layer is no difference that anybody will do that on the commercial cloud, right? How to do zero trust, how do you deploy the right sets of resources, how do you ensure that as you are concerned about security, you are not holding back the innovation, right? It's quite easy to say, let's go cloud, and then as soon as you mentioned about lift and shift, right? Well, we can easily say, let's dump the whole thing across, right? Zero elimination, zero digital transmission, zero agility. Well, we're just doing it for doing sake. We're not going to do that, right? And how do you ensure that as we do that, we don't build what we call the enterprise non-cloud? How can we go cloud native? How can we ensure that with the confidence of security, we keep innovating on the layer on top? I think that's really the broad approach we're taking towards going to sovereign cloud. The last point I want to raise is, I think Vishal mentioned about capturing the magic, which is important for us. How can we leverage on the cloud to build small little pockets of innovative startup-ish setup that they can have the space and room to innovate and build new stuff, new technology, whether it's something within HTX, whether we co-develop or whether we in-source parts of the component. So these are critical, right? Can we use the cloud to create those pockets of innovation that will drive transmission for the home team? Yeah.
I think you raised quite a few good points there also. There was the fact that security is a very important part of the whole cloud strategy, right? Ultimately, we are being entrusted with this data, right? Very, very sensitive, very valuable data. And last thing we want is for that to fall in the wrong hands and be used for nefarious purposes. In fact, I think technically one of the safest ways is to go back to pen and paper, right? Because it has the least digital sort of ways of getting into it, but then that has its own flaws and issues, and obviously no one wants to go back there. But so we need to figure out how to really secure what we have now, and I think that was some very good points you brought up there.
I mean, in the same manner that we are in the epidemic of post-COVID, we're not going back to the past, right? We're not going back to paper and pen.
Exactly.
And we even talk about the olden days of security where we built moats and walls, right? That era is gone, right? Because people need to access the internet. People need to jump out of their castle, right?
Exactly.
So the era of building, of doing that layered security, which there's still value to that, but we have to recognize with things like zero trust principle, right? The parameter has sort of shifted all the way to the endpoint, to devices, and it's really the approach about how do you sort of secure it end to end. and build on those principles on zero trust. Yeah, yeah.
If I could add to that
Yeah.
piece, because it is about risk appetite and risk tolerance. But if you think about even pre-pandemic, the growing backlog, whether it's digital forensics in courtrooms, those capabilities, ransomware is obviously a high threat area for government agencies, nation state. Like, there's a lot there, but if you don't innovate, if we're back to pen and paper, besides the insider threat problem, you're not going to be able to use the modern tools
Exactly.
to carve through that backlog and really, fundamentally change the interaction, whether it's a police force, a fire service, a court system, even corrections, with constituents and stakeholders, and people-centric approach. If you can't do that, you're going to just have this fundamental backlog that you'll never address. And that's what, especially cyber criminals, are preying on that, and they're benefiting on that right now. And so we do need that paradigm shift.
Exactly. I agree. I think no one wants to go back to the days of where you have to necessarily go down to the post office or something to get some, government document updated. It's, I think we are way beyond that, and everyone's better off for
What's
it.
a post office?
It's a building, I think, of some sort. So thanks for that, Panyong. Thanks everyone for lively comments with a lot of great insights. I would just like to ask the audience at this point, you can enter some questions for a Q&A session we'll be having in a while. And you can enter the questions in the chat, which you will see next to us. In the chat box on the right side of the screen. So do submit your questions for any of the guests or general questions, and we'll get to them towards the end of this panel. So let's move on to some other general questions, which I feel all of you will have interesting insights on. So let's start with some survey results that we found. Deloitte has found that 76% of surveyed public sector leaders felt that digital technologies were already disrupting the public sector, but only about 41% of them were satisfied with their organization's reactions to these trends. Where do you think most organizations fall short of achieving what the cloud has to offer? Sunil, I was hoping you could start us off with this, given your varied experience in this exact issue.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great question, and the survey I think is pretty accurate, right? So I think there's a disconnect between the organization leaders. The expectation is, as a panel mentioned, as to where we are going, as especially in a cloud journey, right? You see, end of the day, I'll take the example where I am today in Tucson, Arizona. Our agents and our border agents and our officers who we talk to on a daily basis, they want tools. They want tools which works for them, right? So for them, no cloud does not make any sense to them. What they're looking at, the tools we are providing to them, which can help them to do their jobs. Today, I've gone to some remote parts of our borders, and that's what we are seeing, right? Is that the complexity involved, the terrain, all the kind of things. It's not that simple. So for them, the word cloud and some of these components may not mean a whole lot. But from the management perspective, including their leadership, the plan is that we should start moving towards the cloud. And what the benefits, all the panel just talked about, I'm not going to repeat those benefits. That's what disconnected, that 76 to 40%, what you just mentioned from Deloitte. I think that's a very valid argument. But I think our job is to take the transformation journey in such a way that's seamless to the end user, right? That's the bottom line. If you do that and then start asking questions, I can tell you that number will start matching up even more, right? And that's exactly what we have seen and what we are seeing. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to do like these small pockets of proof of concepts, prove it out, get a group of users who are not a believer in certain cases, bring them on and show them, hey, this is what you just used. You like it or not? And they say yes. If they say yes, guess what? We transform this into a completely new way of doing things. And that's exactly what we are seeing. And I tell you, it's not easy, especially the vastness of our borders and how large United States is, what we have to do. So we are taking baby steps, but I can tell you for sure that there are certain projects which are extremely successful, which our agents and officers don't have to care about. They're all running in the cloud. It's very advanced. There are mobile versions of that also available, what we have given them. Plus, we are also doing analytics on top of that. These are like video surveillance cameras, some of the videos we bring in. They don't care where it's running, and they don't have to. But recently, when I told them where exactly it's running, they said, really? This is not running here? I said, no, this is running on a cloud in a very safe, secure way, and that benefits you are getting. So these are some of the pluses what we are seeing, but definitely a journey. See, the IT component is the easier part, as you can imagine. But when you're dealing with folks who their main job is not to worry about the IT, but their jobs to keep the country safe, the border safe, there's a different kind of expectation, right? So that's what that disconnect is. I think it'll get better as time goes by. So.
Thanks for that, Sunil. I think that's definitely true. I think anyone who has ever made anything knows that what the user ultimately cares about is whether they can do their job better, not how cool the technology underlying beneath it is. And
Sunil, I was absolutely spot on as far as that's concerned, and that's literally the whole point with innovation. And when we're doing it in this agile manner, that iteration loop that you have to create, where you're getting feedback from your customer, is crucial, right? And ultimately, the value is in the application. Right? It doesn't really matter how you deliver that service. It's all about the value that the customer derives. So one of the key things there is, and what he's been able to do, obviously, is he's been able to communicate directly with the folks that are consuming that app and get that feedback loop. That's what will lead to innovation eventually.
I think, I think like the 911 system in the US is also quite a good example of using cloud to get that iterative feedback loop. They started from small cities and they expanded to the whole nation. I don't know if, Kirk, would you say that in your experience, you worked with quite a few large companies, and I think this question is particularly good for you as well, because you've seen how organizations try to achieve what is optimum, but how they may fall short. Would you agree with what Sunil said?
I do, and I mean, part of the thing I like the most is the proof of concepts. Agile, quick to deliver, prove value. The private sector needs to prove value to the public sector in what they're talking about, but then pivot as needed to start with the mission outcome. I never liked the transactional. I want to sell you something is the wrong approach. And if that's your relationship in the tech world, you don't have the right partner in that. Let's think about mission outcome. Let's think about how we optimize who the stakeholders are and how we go evolve what we can do. You mentioned the 911 call centers, PSAPs just around the world. That's a complex environment, right? And it's a lot of analog, decades-old technology. But when I think about situational awareness, like for Sunil and his staff on the southern border, maybe they're in a disconnected environment. For a police officer or a fire crew going to a structure fire, there's so much capability now to start harmonizing, existing infrastructure that I know, hey, my fire's on the northwest corner on the 3rd floor and I got 3 victims. That's valuable, right? And I can understand before I'm on scene what I might need, or if I'm going to a call for a domestic violence as a police officer, are there known weapons? Are there victims? When was the last time we were there? Just these morsels of information that right now sit siloed by and large, and having data and cloud bringing it together, that single pane of glass, to me, is where you start, reducing that decision tree process and accelerate how effectively you can take that reactionary posture, and now you're starting to dictate a positive outcome for it. From complexity of a terrorist attack or natural disasters down to day-to-day operations for any first response agency.
I think I just add on to the point that so the unit I run is called Cloud Transmission for a reason, because we recognize that a lot of times we are not infrastructure. I didn't call myself cloud infrastructure, but cloud transmission. For the reason is sometimes we create so much friction for our users, right? We want to bring them the IT lingo. Say, look, I got a project. You got to understand servers and switches and routers and design specification, a whole bunch of stuff, right? Say, look, because we want to also some say run away from responsibility or so-called co-owned responsibility, we bring about those friction to them. I think transformative technology or good technology must be one that is low friction, transparent to users. And you want to say, for example, you're going to use a pop-up app. Your focus is, I want to use it to communicate with people, right? Share information. I want to consume data. I think that it's the same thing, right? We want to make sure that whatever technology we deliver it meets the needs of home team officers first and foremost, right? And we should take away the frictions of technology from them, right? Make it kind of transparent for them. And as part of what we do is, how do we do that? How do we do what we call architecture shift up? I.e., I think Sunil mentioned about more SaaS, more PaaS, more some of these things, right? How can we sort of hide the lower layer? And sometimes I tell my folks, right, look, can we architect such that our job goes away? Right, so it become that developers can do their stuff, the users can consume, achieve their mission, right? And we should be hidden, right? We should be low friction in what we do. Yeah,
that's definitely an important point, and I'm thank you for bringing that up because I feel your experience leading cloud transformation here will give you a very good insight into what organizations may fall short on from the inside.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask next actually about a question that about a point that Kirk you brought up about the frontline workers. Public safety and security is very important, and ultimately we want all our frontline workers, our enforcement officers, all to be safe, right? And how do you think that their safety can be enhanced by leveraging on the cloud? What are some ways in which the cloud can be used to not just make them better at their jobs, but safer at their jobs?
I think for me, it's being able to use things like, AI chatbots, simple thing in translation service. Before I was with Secret Service, I was a police officer. And if I had an interaction with somebody that spoke a foreign language, I would first talk really loud in English. They're thinking they'd understand me, right? But then I'd have to call the dispatch. They'd call language line. It's a slow process. And if it's an adversarial contact, I don't want to give them a phone, but I needed to communicate. And technology's evolved to the point you can do those simple engagements now on a smartphone device and have that capability, removing paper from the process. I think location services, if I can't raise an officer or a fire crew or an ambulance crew on the radio, what's their last known location, what call for service we're on, where the closest units, calling in cameras in that constellation to see where it is, and then the video and the data analytics piece of that. So cloud to me enables that, again, optimizing what's already been purchased with large, mostly big cities around the world. They have CCTV, both the ones that are government owned, but the private sector, and having MOUs in place to access those as needed, just to draw those insights and that awareness. And again, there's so many different systems to access. If you can use artificial intelligence to push that information to the first responder, eliminate as many choke points that might exist, I think then you start having those capabilities and giving them the right digital tools in the field to do their job.
Suni, would you also have to deal with creating products that enhance the safety of your officers at the border? I'm sure there are some quite dangerous encounters quite frequently as well. So would you agree with what Kirk said, or how would you say that cloud can enhance safety for your officers?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's correct. What he said was right on. He was speaking with respect to police enforcement and police encounters. For us, a little bit different, something similar, especially in the southern border. But also keep in mind what happens when we get passengers from various parts of the world coming into our airports in the United States, right? So we do have we do have translation apps we have built on the cloud now to make life easier for everybody, right? So that's a good example. But even for, like you mentioned, like encountering with folks with a different language they're talking, and you need to translate that. It happens a lot, especially in the southern during apprehensions and things like that. So, foreign language, I would say, from translation perspective, it plays a very major role for us. But from the cloud perspective, right? That's again the innovation component comes into effect, and we are looking some interesting way of doing things. I just can't talk about it in a little more detail, but we're going through that. It's a little bit more classified things, but in general, we are looking at some very innovative ways of doing some of those pieces. Think about, as I mentioned, about radars, drones and these kind of technologies, right? So all those components also playing into law enforcement, right? So we have drones, they have your counter drones also, right? So you can imagine somebody trying to fly something across the border, and we have to intercept that, right? So all those things what we work on plays a role in some of these transformation, especially in the cloud. And our goal is ultimately here to that our data, as you mentioned also, Bang, that we don't want to send out data which we cannot access to. It's very, very important to us, super important to us. The second component of that is, but what we are doing is to make sure mitigate some of the risk, especially in the transformation, is we are actually starting to break up our application into smaller chunks. So that seemed to be one big area we are working on. But if you look at around in general across the board, all these components has some way they're connected to each other, right? We talk about translation apps. We talk about some of the counter SOS or drones itself. All have components, all have security, all have end-to-end security component through zero trust. So it's all a connected way of doing things now, and cloud in general is playing a major role to what Vishal talked about, right? The thing is, you are able to generate and create innovation at a very, very fast speed now, which we could not do before. Tools are available, right? All your modeling is available. Everything is available these days within the cloud providers. You bring it in, secure it, and create some innovating ideas and products. That's what we're working towards. And I'm telling you that the cloud is making the life easy for everybody. And it's also creating a democracy for everybody. Like Vishal is a small entrepreneur, awesome, the stuff he's doing. The reason he's going to be very successful competing with the large companies, sorry, Kurt, including Microsoft.
What?
No, we're partners. We don't compete.
Yeah. But I think to that point too, because even like edge capabilities, edge processing, we did a proof of concept in Australia with an agency there and doing a search and rescue mission with a stack appliance that could do looking for a human, looking for a vehicle, looking for a certain color clothing that the missing person was last known wearing, be able to do that with drones on a mesh network and doing that without connectivity, or if you need to default to SATCOMs, it's there, right? You have those capabilities to pull down those learning models and do that. And it's, natural disasters, right? Like those are increasing in frequency and severity. It absolutely deprecates your infrastructure. If you can stand something up quickly to get back up and running, do basic services, you're winning, right? That's what you're looking for.
I think I want to echo Sunil's point on find the right technology, secure it, and then let people use it, right? And the one that can really relate to is this, right? Oftentimes in the government, we try to build competitive product from the industry. You say, look, that's not good enough, that's not secure, that's built from ground up, right? But the issue is you're not able to get the level of innovation and quality of product because the product industry is well tested, right? Lots of adoption, right? They get this level of quality. A good example is WhatsApp or Telegram, right? So today we're going to build an alternative chat system, right? Over time, because that's more convenient, that's more accessible, people tend to gravitate towards that, right? The challenge for us is how do we make sure that we pick the right technology, secure it, and have the right mass adoption and have the best user experience. I think that's really some of these challenges we face, right? With picking the right technology. Yeah,
that's true. It's definitely true.
I want to add one thing. The only challenge when you're kind of adopting these technologies and adapting them, changing them, modifying them to make sure that they meet the needs that you have in terms of security, governance, all these other aspects, is long-term maintainability of what you create, right? Which is one of the reasons why I think packaging it and then providing it as a service to the rest of government to use and Singapore has adopted this model to a large extent, works the best, because now you have a group of folks that are, they're effectively created in a way that allows them to repeatably maintain that application for the long term. Because what happens is you're building on top of services that themselves are changing, right? New versions come out of all of these applications. Who is making sure that stays functional as versions update, right? And I think that's a dedicated job, that someone has to do that to make sure it's continuously compatible.
I think that's definitely a good point, because if you remember the Log4j issue that happened late last year, it was one library that everyone uses, haplessly managed by some Apache, but like a small team, and someone found a vulnerability, and so many organizations were affected by that. So I think it's a very good point. And actually that takes us to a question that I have for you, Vishal, which is Gartner found that about 95% of cloud security failures in 2020 were due to the customer's mistakes. Now, that might help in blame mitigation and for insurance, but it is ultimately bad for anyone who relies on cloud services. So maybe as we here at HTX embark on our cloud transformation journey, what can we and the cloud providers do, or rather users and providers do together to prepare for such cloud security failures?
Well, there's a couple of important things kind of wrapped up inside that, right? Yes, you do have these kind of security incidents occur, and yes, vast majority of the time they're not related to the service that's being provided. The reality is that you already have significantly higher security when you're running it on the cloud. When you're doing it yourself, all the way from the networking, the hardware, the individual, IT maintenance stuff that has to be done, your risk profile goes up so dramatically in a data center, especially if you're running your own data center. You're getting a high level of security at that infrastructure level directly from the cloud. And that's another kind of coming back to the same original point of it being a building block. There are best practices. There are the benefit of having everything be programmable and API driven means that you can build repeatable security models that are then applicable to multiple environments simultaneously, because the cloud is the same, right? The APIs that they're providing are the same across the board. So you can standardize and you can repeat. So once you've secured something, it stays secure. And there's ways to verify that through software. So it's not a manual process. You're not reliant on an individual, that might make a mistake. You have the ability to both create policy as code and then enforce that continuously. So even if things happen to stray, and we call that infrastructure drift that happens over time, you can catch it when it happens, and you can make sure that's not going to have an impact. I believe that things like GCC, for instance, are helping the government to consume these services at scale without a fear of falling outside the bounds of the best practice security. So you're already kind of on that path.
And I think we can take that to the public question, because I feel there's a very interesting question here that leads from this, which is, what are some of your cloud resiliency strategies? Because I feel this cloud security failure is one of the ways we have to be resilient if and when it happens, right? What are some Fanyongs for you? What are some of the cloud resiliency strategies?
There's many aspects to it. One is there's different layers of resiliency, right? So maybe at infrastructure level, the good thing is what the cloud provider brings on the table is that level of resiliency, right? Most in the case of sovereign cloud, we actually have three data centers that provide a very good level of resiliency at that level. But I want to talk a bit more about from a technology resiliency perspective. Right? We always have a multi-cloud approach. So we're not going to put all our eggs in the Microsoft basket, unfortunately, for Microsoft. So we recognize that we need to go towards a multi-cloud strategy to give us that flexibility to move around. And Vishal talked about API. And how do you build what I say bias option, technology bias option with things like IAC, infra as code, to allow us to say, look, we can cross cloud when necessary. So I think that will give us that level of resiliency from a skill sets and people perspective. And I believe that's actually much more important vis-a-vis what the cloud provider does really very well in terms of building global infrastructure, multi-site resiliency, because that's something that's really in their game, in their craft, and they've been doing an excellent job the last few years in the cloud.
Kirk, would you, as sort of an advocate for Microsoft in this case, would you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think the resilience, whether it's landing zones, availability zones, and those capabilities, again, back to the cyber discussion. I mean, I just love the push for like zero trust, just generic around the world, least privilege access, verifying identity, the devices, the network. You need that to be secure. For us, the $1 billion plus a year we invest in just cybersecurity alone, but then the data center footprints and the lessons learned. And again, back to that public-private partnership at the start of the conversation this is just a never-ending journey and iterations and learning. And if you fail fast, pivot and go forward and keep, for us, keep building out that trust in the stakeholders is critical.
I missed a point earlier is also about how we build software, right? Going back to what I said earlier, and also what I think Sunil mentioned as well, right? We can't do a lift and shift. We got to build applications that are resilient by design, right? We talk about microservices and things like that. I quote Sam Newman. He said, look, it's really thinking about independent deployability, right? Can you break things to microservices where one fail, it doesn't affect the rest of stuff, right? You can deal with those changes on the fly. So we have to also rethink how we write code, how we write software to leverage on the capability of a cloud. If not, then it's always what our quote Gregor Hope says, right? You become an enterprise non-cloud.
Yes, correct. Sunil, could I get your view on that as well?
No, I was just saying, I was just agreeing at what Pan said. That's exactly what the differentiation is. Start building these applications in the siloed fashion so that your services, whatever you're building, does not affect anything else, right? And we are going towards that. We actually have a blueprint. We're working towards that. And it's not easy, especially size for hours, but that's exactly what we are doing. And the monolithic massive databases, those days are gone. And I think you need to build the services base. And that's exactly what we are doing also. So thank you. This excellent discussion on this topic here. I think, and it's a very important discussion also for everybody.
Thank you. So I think that's all the time we have. Sadly, today I feel we still have a lot more to discuss. We'll sign in next time, I guess. Next year's TechX Summit again. But yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you Sunil. Thank you Vishal. Thank you Kirk, and thank you Panyong for your very engaging and insightful answers. I feel like we have learned a lot about how HTX and how other organizations approach the same issue, which is cloud digital transformation and other issues like cloud security and all the and these other very critical parts of our infrastructure. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone here for participating and for being here with us today. We've come to the end of today's panel discussion.